Hello, thank you for being here for an important and timely discussion. I am Anna Clark, co-founder of the Inclusive Economy Consortium. We are a peer-to-peer network of professionals dedicated to creating a climate-smart, inclusive economy. We're here today, thank you EarthX for offering the platform to discuss the importance and application of transformational technology to creating a sustainable future. And we're fortunate to have with us an expert in applying blockchain technology to track and manage sustainability across value chains in business and in investment, and also to support transparency in a post-COVID world. And finally, to help small and mid-sized businesses access market opportunities. So I'm pleased to introduce with me Amy Seidman, who is founder and CEO of Noble Profit and co-creator of BFLO, a blockchain technology in sort of process, and she's going to update us on the status of this very exciting technology to track and verify sustainability claims and many other important functions. So Amy, thank you for being here. We're gonna dive in and talk, sorry, did you have something? Okay, we're just having fun here. This is a great forum to do this on Zoom. But we are, as we know, we're in the middle, so it's hard to deny that fact. And before the pandemic crisis, though, we had a climate crisis, and we still have a climate crisis that we're dealing with. So we at IEC are very interested in your work, Amy, for that purpose. But we're also really interested to learn more about how you are supporting the smallholders and small business owners of the world. What with the need to understand where funds are going and their origin and destination. I understand that, you know, in a global society, there's a lot of complexity. And at the same time, there's just a lot of fear and misunderstanding. So you're here to clear all of that up for us. We're very happy to have you. So without further ado, why don't we just start with the world as you see it today and how you see your technology fitting into it.
Well, thanks so much for that amazing introduction. And thank you, EarthX, for having us and for the institute that you work with. So I think what's good to understand is how the world works today. And of course, today is a very unusual time for all of us. And it's an unusual time because the entire world is a part of it, and we have an opportunity to really think through, what do we want the world to look like when we come out of this? And oftentimes transformational change requires really pivoting in our lives and in the way that we do things. And in order to do that, we have to look at, you know, where are we today? And it's never been easier for small businesses to conduct business. With the advent of technology, cloud computing, and communications, it's amazing how easy it is for a small business to access the kinds of tools that 15, 20 years ago would have been just out of their reach. So, you know, when we look at these systems, however, they're built on old systems. You know, we are coming out of structures, banking structures, industrial structures that are based on World War II or decades of regulations and financial systems that stem back to the Depression. And we're simultaneously seeking this awakening to climate change with the massive amounts of money being divested from what are considered dirty investments. I have some slides I can share. Do you think this is a good time to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so BFLO is really about tracking, verifying, and managing proof of reputation around sustainable business and investment. And what does that really mean? You know, when we look at this, you know, global space, it's incredibly complicated. And ESG and impact investing, according to UBS, has been estimated at 30 trillion and growing. So, you know, they're thinking actually 40 trillion at this point, but the numbers as of last summer were pointing to 30 trillion. And we're looking at 39 trillion in spending from global GDP towards this. This is enormous. This is not, you know, a trivial thing. And so when we start to really look at what does that mean in terms of the funding, in 2017, the United Nations FCCC, which is the Arm for Climate, did a study about investments that happened in that year. And we can see these blobs of color representing different amounts of money, and a couple of gray blobs over the summer that were in the trillions of dollars. But there's very little transparency behind that. Meanwhile, businesses are differentiating themselves with positive sustainability footprints. But not all claims are true, and there's reasons for it.
So yes, I mean, this is interesting for me too, from the standpoint of somebody who spent many years working in sustainability reporting, and it is a lot of times that the lack of truth is due to lack of good data. So it's interesting to see where the advancements are happening in terms of ensuring that we have just better data to work with.
Yeah, but when you look at the way, say, the stock market works with the Bloomberg terminal, we have public companies reporting and ESG metrics that are being created from combinations of information. Most of that information is self-proclaimed. There's very, very little verification behind it. There's some greenwashing. 25% of the companies in the world are actually leading in this, and then you have, others who are sort of jumping on the bandwagon and using it in their branding. But the problem lies because of the fragmentation of data. There's 600 eco labels. We have complexity that is not just relating to these different kinds of measurement systems or frameworks and standards that exist, but we have geography, we have industries that are incredibly different. Water is different than chemicals, that's different than, say, forestry. And there's an inconsistency, and that is also very expensive and hard to access. And when you look at how much money is transferring, to connect the dots, we really need to know where those dots are. So that transparency and that source of truth is really needed, because right now the information is just like a jumbled ball. Well,
why don't you share with us a little bit about how it works?
What we believe the value add has to do with being able to see across value chains. We're not going to solve everything, and there's a lot of great technology that's being evolved. And there are many, many actors that are playing in the field, and we're not looking to replace any of them. We're looking to meet the market where the market is and to help businesses. So when you really look at the way that business is running today on these different cloud systems, SAP, Microsoft Azure, AWS, Salesforce, IBM, they all are providing, tools and mechanisms for supply chain, for running businesses. And then you have the big four, the auditors that are helping facilitate, as well as all the small certifiers that, when we talk about the big four, we're talking about KPMG and PwC and others. So when we start to look at the ability of a CEO of a major corporation or someone in the government or a very large agency to be able to look across the different value chains, it is dizzying. And so what we've been doing is designing a system that can help using the SDGs to map across these different value chains. I think it's important to talk about what are the SDGs for those people who don't know. Sustainable Development Goals are a set of goals that came out of the Millennium Foundation. And it's basically a set of principles that have been adopted by the United Nations that business, government, and finance are all mapping these disconnected types of information to. They're qualitative, they're not quantitative. So they're not going to replace everything, and they're missing some of the pieces that we might need to make those granular decisions. But we see it as an anchor point. And when you start to create systems, you need to have something that you can anchor together. When you have a lot of disparate data, feel free to.
Sure. So, I mean, very, very fascinating. So there's so many different frameworks that companies are used to report sustainability, but SDGs are probably at the top of the list for everyone now. And so I'd like to know a little bit more, I think for our listeners, especially who are not as familiar with blockchain, if you could just kind of pause here for a minute and help us understand the mechanics of how you map from SDGs into these companies.
Sure. So we're not necessarily going to try to solve every single problem, and the complexity is vast when you start to look at the amount of types of different transactions that could occur. Blockchain is really interesting in the fact that it's immutable. So to go and try to backpedal on a claim, you can't, because the information is pretty much cemented in digital stone. And that's where the point of truth can occur. So when you look at a big corporation or government or finance, there's money that comes out into multiple projects or investments that, or countries, if you're the World Bank, and that money goes into smaller investments or infrastructure projects, farming, whatever that might be, forestry. And then there are the individuals who are part of it, as well as the environmental footprint. So it's really about hitting each point and committing that to this digital fingerprint.
Right.
So it's really about setting those points along the way.
So if we are creating an immutable record of companies' actions, then obviously it's important that the data that goes into that record is sound. Where does the blockchain application pull all of the data from? Can you share more about how that works with that?
Sure. Dirty data in is dirty data out. So you're still going to have to bring in the standards and the frameworks. We're not creating new standards. We're not creating new frameworks. We're not replacing anything. We're providing a mechanism between these points of information. So what our system is a combination, and what the blockchain in particular is a point of truth. And that point of truth is the truth of what is that statement in the moment, and not allowing people to backpedal and being able to trace it back to the origination point.
So it's just your vision is very exciting. So
thank you, I appreciate that. So and that's not a small task in terms of trying to anchor the information across many systems that can then feed into what we're creating as a touch point and a connection point. And when we start to look at this forest of these giant providers, these cloud computing providers, as well as giant companies or nations or agencies, there's a need for sharing that information between them. So we see this as as part of our rollout, to be able to anchor and have our program applicable within each of these systems.
So this would go well beyond the classic annual sustainability report or other more static modes of reporting.
Yeah, the idea is that a company can start to create an ongoing live representation. There's a lot of fear and worry by these companies that they might be misinterpreted, misconstrued, but also for their trade secrets, who are their vendors, and then there's national security for some of these, not just national security, but global security and the well-being of others within the system. So it's kind of a dance between private and public information. But the idea is that they can push their claims on a regular basis. Instead of once a year, they can start to compete for who is the most sustainable. And I think that that's where we're going to start to see rapid change, as well as more real information when you start to look at your portfolio as an individual of who do you want to invest your money in. And that's where this movement of divestment is coming from, and the pressure from many companies to start having more transparency behind the things that they're saying and what they're doing.
Certainly, thank you.
Yeah, and there's other benefits. I don't know if it's the right time to talk about that, but so when we start to look at some of the problems within the system, we look at the truth behind some of the claims by the vendors that are hiring. I mean, there's a lot of risk for companies, and these kinds of tools can play a big role in risk management, in being able to help them track complaints within the system.
I think with the use cases, it's another chance to speak to the benefits and how it works because it's more tangible. So let's definitely dive into that.
Okay, so like everybody, we are looking for how can we use our technology to help with the COVID situation. So we've started, there's a nice list here of potentials of how we can start to build upon what we're doing. Right now, we are looking at tracking and reporting some of the resource flows and the aid that is coming out. So we have a very early map of some of the information that's been coming out, and that's valuable for others to be able to see where does this aid need to go? So what are the missing links? You know, if everybody's buying masks and building incubators and nobody's helping people in poor neighborhoods who are more vulnerable, we're starting to see this, you know, need for kind of, okay, let's point our resources in that direction. We start to see another layer of a three-dimensional kind of layering together that can help really inform people who are deploying resources and aid, as well as finding out how are those resources being used.
So absolutely anybody who watches, reads the news about the current crisis can see an immediate need for this. How close are we to having something that's, commercialized enough to be used in this context?
Okay, well, MFLO, we have a very early map, and I will be sharing that hopefully in the next few days of what is already in our system. And given the resources, we can start to automate some of this and start to bring in more information.
Well, as we all consider ways to be more prepared and just general preparedness for these kinds of disasters, I would hope that this kind of transformational technologies is on the minds of our leaders. What is the status of this type of solution as far as the will to bring it to life?
I found people very receptive and excited, and I'm finding people are extremely receptive. But because, it's been a few weeks since we started the MFLO, we have only just scratched the surface of having conversations with people about it. And it's sort of like we're doing it. We're providing something that we believe is going to be an advantage versus going and doing customer surveys. But I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback of, wow, this is really needed. I'm not seeing anything like this out there. So I could probably answer that question a little bit better in a week.
Well, a lot of us in sustainability, sometimes people think that our ideas are too far into the future, too conceptual. So it's interesting that here that you have a use case in front of us that is now being used.
So the example that I have up now, I think, is a really robust example of how our technology can be used. And we've been working with Indigenous Designs, which is a wonderful clothing company that provides clothing that is made without slavery from organic materials. And when we look at our lives and we look at everything around us, in this, modern society that we're living in, we are benefiting off of the backs of the bottom billion. I don't feel so great about a lot of the clothes that I wear because of that, and I feel really great when I wear Indigenous Designs because I know that the products that they're creating have been thought through. And I think that's the difference between companies that are game changers in the world, where they're really rethinking every aspect, from cradle to cradle to where is the sourcing coming from, how are the people being treated in the company. So in the case of Indigenous clothing, they have organic farmers who provide cotton, and so they're actually giving business to very small farmers, which is part of us solving some of the big agricultural issues, with pesticides and things like that. And then we have these nuclear family businesses that are small mom and pop shops of mostly women who are artisans coming together to do the weaving and the building of these designs, these beautiful, lovely clothes. And so we see a place where you have small micro businesses flourishing and thriving. And the technology is really about the application of it, and how we applied it was we were using this as a use case to test our assumptions. Can we use our technology in apparel as well as in fiber, the sourcing of the fiber, which is related to regenerative economy of wanting more organics in our soil? And then how do we handle the sweatshop paradigm within these use cases from the standpoint of a positive use case? And we're layering in and have started a consortium around anti-slavery so that within the system, signal can be brought to light about vendors who might be not doing the best around how they're treating the people in their workplace. And then that information is attached to that vendor within the system and can also be reported based upon what is called KYC, Know Your Customer, and AML, anti-money laundering. So we've tested our assumption, and we have an API, which is basically a technology link to the systems that we've created. And in the future, we're designing applications that would enable these kinds of companies to run, so that you could have a small micro business that helps network different small producers and enable them to scale to meet large business demands, because there's such a disconnect between big business and small producers.
This is a very exciting kind of picture of what makes you transformational, because I know in the classic CSR paradigm, so much of apparel is just a reaction to, you know, the crises that occur in factories in places like Bangladesh along the way to getting our clothes made. And we rarely get to hear about the positive transformation that could occur when companies help these small producers scale. So understanding that that goes into a positive record is very exciting.
Yes, and we're working with the Responsible Sourcing Network, which is a local group here that's a part of As You Sow. And they've been doing a lot of work on how slavery happens within yarn. They had a project called Yes. And we see 60% of the yarn in the world produced with child slavery.
Wow.
You know, and it's just a sad thing. And so when we start to look at the power of a company to affect the lives of so many people, part of it has to do with the choices that are made, the designs of the companies. And it's a very difficult thing to change the way the world has been working. But I think that models like Indigenous, you know, show us that we can do this. But we need technology to make it efficient. We need technology to make it affordable. When you go into some of these stores and you buy a pair of pants for $15, $20, there's a reason it's so cheap. And that reason might not be something that we really want in our world. And I think that with technology and automation, robotics, I think that we're going to see a lot of this disparity move into a place that people can start to have lives that might be more fulfilling, and be artists and be a part of making things and growing things.
So with so many of the clear benefits that you're just articulating so well, Amy, what do you see as some of the barriers to adoption? Does it make so much sense?
Well, barriers of adoption for what? Our technology or just transformation in general?
Well, both, but specifically this technology, since we're talking about it. It's just interesting to know where things are and where they need to go. And people are very action oriented in our network. They want to know how to be part of the change. Yeah, no, I would love it. So, so we've been doing these small use cases to kind of test our assumptions, and we felt that that was really important, and really looking at where is the value of what we can offer, and how can we connect with who is already there doing the work. And what we found is there's a tremendous advantage to, or what we believe is a tremendous advantage to using technology to help augment some of the pain points that are occurring for companies in reporting back to investors, or even investment firms that are investing in small companies, in being able to roll up all of that information to their investors, because there's been a change in the way that investors want to invest. They no longer want to stick their fingers into big funds. I want to invest in women, or I want to invest in education. So now you can start to granulize some of those things. And in this case, this use case is, I think, a great example of the non-quantifiable types of information that, you know, are more qualitative. We have Bay Area Green Tours, which is a wonderful nonprofit here in the Bay Area. And they work with other nonprofits like Food Shift on food sovereignty and food education. And LinkedIn takes these tours and they use it for employee engagement. And they're great opportunities for team building, and they involve also education around the food that's being sourced to feed the people in the company who are working there, because LinkedIn actually has a great way of feeding their employees, bringing in lots of different kinds of wholesome and organic food.
But education is extremely hard to quantify. And employee happiness and things like that. And so when you start to look at these ESG metrics, the environmental social governance metrics of companies, it's very hard to quantify this. So the barriers for us have to do with just building it to a scale that people can adopt it easily, plug it in, turn it on. And so being in this in-between space, we've started something called the BFLO Lab, where we're inviting companies to work with us, and where we'll look at their specific use cases and customize that build for them. And
Very
we have some other.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
The B Lab concept, because it sounds as if you are co-creating with the users that you hope will ultimately adopt the system, and they're both in the for-profit and nonprofit sectors. And you have an eye to look with public sector organizations as well.
Yeah, of course, we do. In terms of how we would look at the structure of the system, we see NGOs and academics all playing a role within these different types of cohorts of the verification. We see a place for the data creators and the standards and the framework, because we don't believe that we're going to create a new standard or a new framework. It's really about harnessing what is already there, and the amazing people are doing this good work. And then also to make it easier for those audits and to create those kind of digital audit trails.
How do organizations choose to participate in your B Lab?
And send us a note, and we'll be happy to get back to you.
Excellent. If there's a little bit of time left, future potential, can we speak to that just a little bit?
Sure. When we start to look at the future, we did a study on anti-slavery. So we formed a coalition to try to start to create a system, a safeguard system. How can we serve these populations, people who are in vulnerable positions, and from nonprofits who are making complaints? So we see that being a really important piece in the future, and playing a role. And when we start to look at the interconnection of, clean tech, impact, people, technologies, earth, we have an incredible opportunity to do transformation of our future and connect these technologies. And so what I see being the future are networks, and we will be a part of that. But I see the connection points. It's less about everybody coming to one portal as much as us all connecting this information together and having systems where we can have shared value networks, where we can eliminate fraud and we can eliminate exploitation by making better choices, by choosing companies that, like Indigenous, that are creating really great products and really helping bring people out of poverty. And we have an incredible opportunity today with where we all are to contemplate what we want in our future. How can we change the way that we are doing business in the world? How can we create a better world for each other?
Well, we're delighted that you were able to share with us how blockchain-enabled technology can help us all leverage the power of networks to change how we consume, invest, and partner with other businesses. So very exciting stuff, Amy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I hope that I was able to help shed some light on the potentials.
Absolutely. Yes, we look forward to getting to do more in the future with you and your technology.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.